that rock is under there, you know. And way up the bank, way back there, these boats are going around like a motorcycle in a racing ring, you know. Up on the, way up, the water was sort of run out of oars, broken oars or something. So the next year, they went down to finish it. They left the boats there. And that was 58, 90-some thousand. And they got down to Lava Falls and took one look and shoved the boats in the river, let them go, and hiked out, climbed up this horrible slide, and got Riffy to take them around to Lake Mead. And there they rented a motorboat, and they went up river, and sure enough, they found one of Pat's boats had gone all the way from Lava, somehow down by itself. And then later on, Georgie came towing his other boat out upside down. And all the cameras and everything were missing, and they blamed Georgie for stealing everything, which was pretty silly. And they never could find Moldy's boat, though. We took the plane. That time it was not what I have now. We went out flying around over Lake Mead, over and over, all over the place. But Lake Mead was a massive, the upper ends of Lake Mead, all the side bays and that were massive log jams then. Trees, they're just full of logs blown in. The lake outside would be clear, but the bays would fill with these logs that the wind would blow in. And we looked everywhere. And that was in 1950, what did I say, 58. And we never found it, but somebody found it years later in Lake Mead.
The other boat.
The other boat, not Riley's other boat. He had his two boats back. He found one coming down the river, and Georgie towed the other one out, upside down. She was towing it. Can't beat that. And so then they went back in 59 with another 90,000 a year, and went down. And according to Riley, he lost a lot of oars and all that stuff, but I think he was getting ready to kind of give up on the whole idea by that point. And when they got down to where the Bright Angel Creek meets the river, I mean the Bright Angel Trail, excuse me. Bright Angel Trail meets the river at Pipe Creek, Garden Creek there. Riley took all the stuff out of the boats and filled the boats with rocks and took his geologist hammer and punched holes in them all around the water line and shoved them out in the water. Said, that trip's over, folks. Hike out. Like that. And, so, are you recording this?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. I'll, if you want, we'll...
Well, you missed the first part of it. But
yeah.
I don't think it's worth that much, you know.
It's a pretty interesting approach to river running.
I don't want to hurt his feelings. But that's it.
Well,
and then in 62, I had a yen to go down the river again. I'd been up on the Mackenzie River in Oregon a little bit, you know, and seen what they did there. And those dories, the little fishing boats they call drift boats, were very capable. And I'd rowed one down the Mackenzie, and it was fun. Open boats, though, you know. So I got the idea that we could get some bigger boats made right there by the guys that make them all the time. And we get a couple of them and design them ourselves, really, but have them made there, have them sealed over. And I called Pat about January, I guess it was, and said, let's go down the river. He said, we haven't got any boats. I said, we could adapt these dories to the river. And of course, I knew what he'd say. So, that would never work. Well, then I had to work on him a while and say, well, you know, with your expertise, you're redesigning them a little bit and fitting them out, I know that you can make them work. So he finally got interested, and we each ordered a hull. I ordered a whole boat. I told him how to do that, but he only got the hull, and then he spent months putting in the interior. And that's the boat that's on display at the South Rim now at the Visitor Center, called the Music Temple. First, it was named Susie for his wife, Susie II, because one of those cataract boats had been Susie, and this is Susie II. And when he used it. But then he gave his boats to me when he didn't want to go down the river anymore in '65. So I called it the Music Temple, and I still had my boat. But anyway, the dory trip started in '62, and the Park Service has a little thing up there above the boat saying it started in '63. I call them and say it wasn't '63, it was '62. Oh, we'll fix that, Martin. They never have. It's been 15 or 20 years now. I've told them to fix that. No, I told them a couple of times that was enough. But we went down in '62, and once those boats were on the water, PT got in one of them and started rowing it. He said that was the best feeling boat, of course, he'd ever been in. And they did very well. We made a lovely trip down in '62, and took our time. It's probably 20 days, and everything went in those two boats, plus a regular little Mackenzie boat that we took along. It made it too.
David Brower gives you credit for saving the whole Grand Canyon.
Well, he's just generous. So.
Well, what was your recollection? What the story that he tells is that the Sierra Club didn't want to. They were squabbling over whether there'd be a tasteful marina or not, and he says,
"Yeah, what?
A tasteful marina behind the dams," and he says that you stood up and changed their minds.
Well, I don't consider that to be the thing that saved the Grand Canyon, but I know the thing you're talking about. The board of directors, I wasn't on it, I guess, at that time. I had a total of 3 terms on the board of directors. Each one is 3 years. But they were, I don't remember the year, but the problem is the Sierra Club and most other environmental groups and individuals believe we're going to lose. They just don't want us to lose quite so bad. In other words, ruin the place, but don't ruin it as bad as you might have if we weren't there. That's been an attitude in conservation and environmentalism. It's still with us. They're going to do it, but we hope they'll do it nice, like building the SST and so forth. So the Sierra Club wanted to look strong and tough and in control. And so the then president of the club stood up before the board of directors, before the whole club for that matter, all who were there, and he said, the club must be adamant. We must insist, this is what they call the Marble Dam or Marble Gorge Dam, we must insist that there be elevators in the dam so that tourists can get to the bottom of the dam for the wonderful new trout fishing that will be created there by the presence of the dam. Well, that sent me into a fit of rage, and I stood up and expressed myself, and Brower gives me credit for causing the vote to go not for elevators, but against any and all dams in the Grand Canyon. See, they were calling it Marble Canyon Dam. Bureau of Reclamation didn't want people to realize it was going to be in the Grand Canyon. And they could easily confuse people across the nation by saying Marble Canyon Dam, Bridge Canyon Dam. Oh, those are some dams in some canyons named Marble and Bridge, you see. When, of course, that wasn't the case at all. So I had a big map that I had taken. He'd kind of warned me what was going to happen. I'd drawn my own map, where those maps would be, and where those dams would be, and I showed on the map. And I just held that up in front of the assemblage and pointed it out, and I guess that's what he's referring to.
Well, what else did you say? What did you say that? Seems like you must have said something.
Well, I suppose I acted horrified that the Sierra Club could pretend to be on the side of saving the earth and still acquiesce in the damming of the Grand Canyon, as it had acquiesced in the damming of Glen Canyon, without really knowing what it was up to there. But here it had a chance to know. knew what was going to come and was avoiding the issue. And so it was time to bring it out. The problem was the club figured it would lose, you see. The government had all the high-powered lawyers on its side, and all the politicians, including at that time Mo Udall and Stuart Udall, who later turned into good guys, but we had to do it to them. And the dams were a foregone conclusion, just like Echo Park Dam and so forth. And the way the SST was, when that was under consideration, that it would be built and all our airlines would be SSTs. Well, on that occasion, I knew we didn't want an SST, and yet the board of directors squabbled over whether it would fly over the wilderness or over the cities. Some people didn't want it over the cities, others didn't want it over the wilderness. I said, why don't we say what we mean and say it shouldn't be here at all? We don't want it. Vote against it. We can't always prevail, but at least we don't have to take the compromised position to start with. So, finally, after hemming and hawing around about it, the board of directors voted that no SST be built in the United States, and none ever was. I had a terrible time with John Oakes, one of the owners of the New York Times. He was on the board then. He said we'd look ridiculous if we said no SST because we all know it's coming. Why do we want to be on the losing side all the time? I said, we don't want it to come, do we? He said, oh, no. I said, well, you better vote with me. He said, oh, I couldn't do that. But when the vote came, he did. So maybe that had an effect, maybe it didn't. You know, you can't say why these things happen or don't happen, but dams in the Grand Canyon, when the the Central Arizona project was finally authorized by Congress, dams in the Grand Canyon were specifically excluded and outlawed. It should have outlawed the whole project, but there again we didn't know our strength and we couldn't really show why it was a bad thing. The Central Arizona project is as bad as anything that's come along, in reclamation anyway.
Why?
Throwing water away and making billionaires out of crooks, of which Arizona has many, as you know. One reporter who got pretty close to the top people in this whole affair was murdered for it. Don Bull's car was blown up, you know. And it's all been hushed up. Nobody's really gone ahead in Arizona to try to get to the bottom of it, And I suppose it'll be hush-hush. I hope so. Let me say that over again. Arizona doesn't want the truth to come out. They caught the man who put the bomb in the car, and that's as high as it ever got. I think they indicted Robeson and Dunlap, the two contractors who hired him to do it, but nothing ever happened to them. And you can go on up and see the dog racing king Marley, who hired Robeson and Dunlap to get Bowles out of the way. He's dead. He died a natural death, I guess. And when you go above him, you get into the highest politics of Arizona. And the Central Arizona project is a theft. When you talk about Hoover Dam and Metropolitan Water Aqueduct and so forth and so on, you're talking about things that the beneficiaries paid for. These things they're gainers. In other words, they don't cost the government anything net. But when you get down to things like the Central Arizona project and the Central Utah project and Grand Canyon Dam, all the Upper Colorado works, Uncle Sam is expected to pay for that. And there's no reimbursement. It never gets paid back. It isn't intended to be paid back. It's amazing to me that the people of the states that pay all the taxes, Illinois and Pennsylvania and New Jersey and Ohio and California, don't get wise enough to this to stop this reclamation racket in its tracks. Utterly insane to have something like the Central Arizona project throwing water and power away. To grow crops that nobody needs, nobody wants, the government will pay farmers not to grow them. and to help with the destruction of what was a beautiful place, a beautiful region, Arizona, south of it. Pour more water in there, it's like pouring more water into Southern California. Look what it did.
Back at the meeting where the Sierra Club, where you changed their minds, where they voted to try to stop Marble Canyon and Breach Canyon dams. After that,
I don't remember the sequence of the vote, but that's what Dave Brower says happened.
Do you remember that? Did you know Jerry Mander? Did you know him?
Yes. Still do.
I remember reading about how there was a difference of opinion between him and Brower. Were you privy to any of that? Just as
I guess I'd have to be reminded of it. I don't. I know there was some. I think he prevailed at one point, and Brower prevailed on another ad. We've had dealings with him recently and gone through the same thing.
He wanted to punch this stuff up, or when you say go through the same thing, I like he's more of a.
Well, advertising people want a thing to be catchy and trendy. They want it to be sexy. I don't know what Dave wanted, but who did prevail? Do you know? I don't.
There's a book I read, and it talks of what is it? I think it was a story that stands like a dam. I don't know if you've read that or not.
No, and I should.
I'd be curious to know what you think of it. I forget the guy's name who wrote that, but he talks about.
I know him, but I've got the book, but I haven't read it.
He brings up a bunch of interesting stuff. He just sees that as being kind of a crossroads in that particular fight.
You're talking about the New York Times ads,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Sistine Chapel ad.
Yeah.
If you analyze it, it wasn't worth saying, but it was tricky. It caught people's attention, and the analogy was pretty good. But if you get down to the political roots of a problem like that, it becomes dull, and people don't get fascinated by it. You have to keep them interested.
How do you see the business of commercial boating in the canyon? How was it affected by all this? And could you talk a little bit about how it developed and how you saw it in its infancy?
Well, I never intended to be a commercial outfitter in the Grand Canyon. I had a job that I thought I'd probably end up getting my gold watch with or from, but not that I should have. But
what was that job?
Well, I was senior editor of Sunset Magazine then, finally, which was a really pointless place for me to be when it was comfortable. It wasn't helping the world, but on the other hand, I could use the medium of Sunset and the access it gave me to things and places to do the things I thought I should do, like redwoods, trying to get a redwood national park and all that. Many, many things. But to come back to your question, I just was running the river for fun, for pleasure. And that was starting in '65 after Riley no longer wanted to do it. And he sold me his boats, or his dory. He only had one then. And so we started running the river occasionally, once a year or so. And then finally, I couldn't go all the time because more friends wanted to go, and sometimes then there were 3 or 4 trips a year, and I could only go on 1 or 2 of them. So my oldest son, or Francois Lédet, the author of the book, Time in the River Flowing. It was specifically created to save the canyon from the dams. He would lead trips, or my son would. I couldn't go on all of them, and they did fine. And so we had these stories, and more people wanted to go. And finally, I got another boat or two, and word of mouth spread around. And after a while, it wasn't just friends and family anymore. It was friends of friends, and finally, friends and acquaintances, and eventually people I didn't even know were coming on the trips. And so I thought, well, we've got to start getting these people to pay for the cost of these trips, or we'll be in the poorhouse. And so I began to set a price on the trip, and the price depended on who you were, how well I knew you, I think. But finally, it was almost a business, and I guess by 1960,